Is this some kind of joke, Colonel? The young technician's voice cracked beneath the roar of distant turbines. Sunlight glared across the tarmac, burning through the desert haze that hung over Fort Rucker's test range. The massive shape of the AH-64 Apache loomed in the heat, still, silent, and broken. Its rotors drooped like the wings of a grounded hawk. For 3 days, the engine bay had been open. Tools lay scattered across a patchwork of tarps and metal trays. Sweat-streaked faces surrounded the machine like surgeons around a patient they couldn't wake. The T-700 GE-701D engine, the heart of the Apache, refused to breathe. The maintenance hangar had seen its share of problems before. Compressor stalls, fuel line blockages, control faults. But this was different. Every diagnostic system read nominal. Every data line showed green. Yet the engine still refused to start. It was as if the machine itself had decided to die. Colonel Harris stood a few paces back, his hands folded behind his back, watching the chaos with a stillness that unnerved the younger crew. He'd served long enough to recognize a deeper kind of failure, one that went beyond parts and manuals. Every few minutes, another technician approached with a new theory. "Sir, maybe a software corruption. Sir, could be a turbine shaft alignment issue. Sir, maybe we swapped the entire FADEC unit." Harris's silence was heavy. He'd heard them all. He'd approved the part replacements, the recalibrations, even a full electrical teardown. Nothing worked. The Apache sat there, a monument to frustration. Beyond the hangar doors, the Alabama sun blazed across an endless stretch of concrete and heat waves. Somewhere, a distant formation of Blackhawks rose and banked into the sky, their engines alive, echoing the sound of power and precision. The Apache's empty silence felt like shame. Inside, the air reeked of burnt oil and coffee gone stale. The younger officers whispered to each other, their voices filled with doubt. "Maybe this one's done," someone muttered. "They say it's a factory defect. No one's been able to get it running for weeks." Harris turned his gaze toward the open canopy. Inside the cockpit, the screen still glowed faintly, as if mocking them. Systems online, life support active. Everything ready, except the one thing that mattered. A captain from the engineering corps approached, clutching a report. "Sir," he said, hesitating, "we've done everything we can. We even checked for microfractures in the combustion chamber. There's nothing left to test." Harris didn't answer right away. He looked past the officer to the group of younger mechanics gathered near the tool carts. Their uniforms were stained with grease, their faces flushed with fatigue. These were the new generation, bright, eager, confident, raised in a world where everything had a manual and every problem had a code. But this wasn't a code. It was a silence, a mystery, and that silence reminded Harris of something he hadn't thought about in years. A face, half lit by the glow of engine fire, belonging to a man who'd once taught him everything he knew. The colonel's jaw tightened. He turned toward the command post and motioned for his adjutant. "Get me the old roster," he said quietly. "The roster, sir?" "The one from the Apache development program, the early 90s. I want the names of all retired chief mechanics who worked the power systems." The adjutant hesitated, unsure. "Sir, those files are archived." "Then dig," Harris said. "We're out of options." The words fell heavy. The young officers exchanged uncertain looks. It wasn't standard protocol to call back veterans, certainly not those who'd been retired for decades. But something in the colonel's tone silenced any protest. He turned back toward the Apache, watching the sunlight glint off the dull metal. "She's not dead," he murmured. "She's just waiting for someone who remembers how she used to breathe." Outside, the wind shifted. Dust lifted in swirling patterns across the range, spiraling through the hangar doors and coating everything in a thin film of brown. The smell of hot metal and desert sand mixed with oil and sweat, the scent of labor and memory. For a long moment, no one spoke. The young technicians stood motionless, caught between disbelief and curiosity. They'd all heard rumors, stories of the old engineers who'd worked on the first Apache prototypes, the ones who could diagnose problems just by listening to the turbine's hum. Legends from another era, One name in particular still echoed in old training manuals and whispers. Master Chief Raymond Cole, a man who hadn't been seen on base in 20 years. Some said he'd retired to a cabin near the Smoky Mountains. Others said he'd stopped talking about the Army altogether. But those who knew him, truly knew him, said he could hear things in engines that computers couldn't. As the colonel walked toward his office, the camera of memory seemed to follow him, the hum of old machinery fading behind, replaced by the low groan of time itself. Somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rolled, a faint reminder that storms were building again, and beneath that heavy sky, an old man's phone would soon ring. The following morning broke with a thick veil of humidity, the kind that made the air feel heavy enough to chew. The sun had barely risen, yet the hangar was already alive with motion, clipboards snapping, fans humming, boots striking against metal grates. Colonel Harris stood by the edge of the work bay, reviewing the night shift's latest report. It read like every other, endless diagnostics, cross-checks, and results that made no sense. The Apache's systems remained flawless, and yet its heart refused to turn. 3 separate control units swapped, sir, the lead engineer reported. All tests clean, power distribution normal. Start sequence aborts at ignition every time. Harris nodded slowly, saying nothing. His eyes tracked the movement of a young crewman, maybe 22, all nerves and caffeine, wiping sweat from his brow as he leaned into the open engine casing. The man's hands trembled slightly, the kind of fatigue that came from too many failures and too little sleep. Around them, frustration had begun to seep into every word, every motion. There was something in the air that smelled like defeat. From the far end of the hangar, the massive fan blades pushed hot wind through the room, scattering dust across the tool tables. Charts of pressure readings, torque values, and thermal maps fluttered beneath the gusts like forgotten battle reports. For all their education, the younger mechanics were trapped by the same flaw. They trusted what the screen told them more than what the engine felt. Sir, permission to requisition a replacement turbine core, the engineer asked. Harris looked up sharply. That's a $2 million component. You want to replace it on a guess? The engineer hesitated, lowering his voice. At this point, sir, it's either that or admit defeat. The words hung in the air. Admit defeat. No one said anything after that. Somewhere near the back of the hangar, a wrench clattered to the floor. A mechanic cursed under his breath. Someone shut off the music that had been playing quietly from a portable speaker. Defeat had a sound too, the sound of silence filling the space where confidence used to live. Harris turned away, folding the report under his arm. The command post loomed beyond the far wall, glass panels, rows of monitors, digital overlays. It looked modern, efficient, cold, a perfect symbol of the new age, sleek technology without the smell of oil or the warmth of touch. He walked across the floor, the echo of his boots trailing like a metronome of thought. Behind him, the Apache sat under the overhead lights, a hulking, beautiful relic of engineering mastery. Its shadow stretched across the polished floor, split by rays of light spilling from the open bay doors. Even silent, the machine carried authority. Its twin rotors were angled toward the sky as if listening for something lost. The colonel paused beside the wing root and placed a hand against the fuselage. The metal was cool now, but he could still feel the faint pulse of the electrical systems humming beneath. The Apache wasn't dead. She was waiting. He could almost hear her asking, "Where did they go, the ones who understood me?" By midday, news of the colonel's unorthodox request had spread across the base. The idea of calling a retired veteran back into service stirred equal parts skepticism and fascination. "Sir, with respect," one of the younger captains said during the afternoon briefing, "well, what's an old mechanic going to do that our specialists can't?" Harris glanced at the young officer, a man barely old enough to remember the early Iraq deployments. His expression didn't change. "Maybe nothing," he said. "Or maybe everything." The room stayed quiet after that. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of distant helicopters rose again, Black Hawks lifting off in formation, their engines roaring to life in perfect harmony. Every sound was a reminder of what they lacked, that living, breathing thunder of power and precision. The Apache's engine bay remained open, a wound that refused to heal. By late afternoon, the frustration had reached a breaking point. The team gathered for one final attempt, a full start sequence with manual override. The lead technician climbed into the cockpit while others took their positions at the diagnostics terminals. "Ready ignition," the call came through. "Copy that." The hangar filled with a tense stillness. The faint whine of the starter motor began to rise, a sound every soldier there knew by heart. The turbines started to spool, low, uncertain, then faster. For a heartbeat, it seemed like the machine might finally catch. Then, thud, a cough, a shudder, and the engines stalled. The screens flashed red. Ignition fail. Primary fuel flow interrupted. No one spoke. The technician leaned his forehead against the control panel. "It's like she doesn't want to start," he whispered. The colonel closed his eyes. It was the same error, always the same, like a message no one could read. He turned slowly toward his adjutant, who stood by with a sealed envelope in hand. "Sir," the adjutant said, "we found a name in the old records." Harris's eyes opened. "Who?" "Master Chief Raymond Cole, Power Systems Lead, Fort Rucker Development Team, 1989-2004, retired with commendation. No active service since." The colonel stared at the envelope for a long moment before taking it. His thumb brushed over the printed name, smudging the ink slightly. Raymond Cole, the man who could hear machines breathe. He looked up, his voice calm but resolute. "Get me his number." The call went out just after dusk. A storm had rolled through Alabama that evening, thick clouds pressing low over the pine forests, lightning crawling like veins of fire across the horizon. Somewhere deep in the foothills beyond Fort Rucker, an old phone began to ring. In a small cabin surrounded by whispering trees, Raymond Cole sat alone at his workbench. The room smelled of oil, pine sap, and rain. Shelves lined with forgotten parts framed the walls, gyros, pressure gauges, even fragments of old Apache blades that he'd kept like relics of another life. The phone rang again. He didn't move at first. His eyes, pale and tired, stayed fixed on the open engine part before him, a disassembled carburetor from a Harley he'd been restoring for weeks. His hands, though scarred and calloused, still carried a quiet steadiness. By the third ring, he sighed. "If they're calling me," he muttered under his breath, "something's gone truly wrong." He picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was young, too young. It carried that formal tone of someone reading from a script. "Master Chief Cole, this is Captain Avery from Fort Rucker Base Command. We've been authorized to reach out regarding a technical issue involving an AH-64 Apache platform." Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. The rain outside hit harder against the tin roof. "You boys still flying those things?" "Yes, sir. One of our units has been grounded due to an unresolved engine malfunction. Colonel Harris specifically requested your consultation." There was a pause, long enough for the sound of thunder to fill the silence. Cole's expression softened. He hadn't heard that name in years. "Harris," he said quietly. "Didn't think he'd still be in uniform." "Yes, sir. He's base commander now." Cole leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. For a moment he didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the frame photograph hanging on the wall, a younger version of himself, standing beside an Apache under the desert sun. The men around him were long gone or long retired. The caption beneath read, "First live engine test, Fort Rucker, 1989. He exhaled slowly. "Tell him I'll be there in the morning." When dawn broke, the storm had passed. Mist drifted low over the hills as Cole loaded his pickup truck. The truck itself was a relic, a faded green Ford from the 1970s, patched and rebuilt more times than he could count. Its engine purred with the kind of warmth that came from being loved, not just maintained. He drove with the windows down, letting the humid air roll in. The road wound through pine forests and open fields, miles of quiet distance between the man and the world he'd left behind. As he drove, memories surfaced. Long nights under hangar lights, the sound of turbines whining to life, the smell of hot oil and jet fuel mingling with sweat. He remembered teaching recruits how to listen to a machine, not just read its data. "Engines talk," he used to say. "They'll tell you what's wrong if you learn their language." By late morning, the gates of Fort Rucker came into view. The guard at the checkpoint stared for a moment when Cole handed over his ID. The old laminated card yellowed with age. The photograph faded. "Welcome back, Chief," the guard said finally, a hint of awe in his voice. Cole nodded. "Didn't think I'd see this place again." Inside the base, everything looked cleaner, sharper, almost clinical. The hangars gleamed under fresh coats of paint, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic instead of oil. The newer personnel walked past in pressed uniforms, eyes fixed on tablets and checklists. To them, Cole looked like a ghost, a remnant of a world they'd only heard about. When he stepped into the main hangar, the noise died almost instantly. Conversation stopped. Tools paused mid-turn. The sound of his boots against the floor echoed like a memory of discipline. Colonel Harris turned from the observation platform, his face breaking into something between relief and disbelief. The years had carved deep lines around his eyes, but the posture was still military, upright, measured, steady. "Master Chief," he said, walking forward. "It's been a long time." Cole's reply was quiet, almost amused. "You always did wait till the last minute, Harris." A few of the younger technicians glanced at each other, uncertain whether to salute. The colonel gestured them to relax. "He's not here for ceremony," he said. "He's here to teach us something we've forgotten." Cole's eyes drifted toward the Apache. She sat under the highlights, her matte green armor dulled by days of disuse. The open engine bay looked like a wound. He walked closer, his hand brushing the edge of the airframe, as if greeting an old friend. "She's still beautiful," he murmured. "But she's tired. You've been fighting her instead of listening." Harris nodded. "We've tried everything. Systems check clean. No mechanical faults, no data errors. She just won't ignite." Cole said nothing. He crouched down near the intake panel, running a hand along the inner lip, feeling the metal's faint vibration from the cooling fans. He closed his eyes for a second, listening. Then almost to himself he whispered, "No, she's not broken. She's choking." Harris frowned. "Choking?" Cole stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Let me get a look at her heart," he said simply. The crew parted instinctively as he approached the open engine bay. His movements were slow, deliberate, reverent. There was no rush in him, no frustration. Just the calm of someone who understood that machines, like people, needed patience before they could speak. For the first time in weeks, there was silence in the hangar. Not the silence of failure, but the silence of attention. Every pair of eyes followed the old man as he leaned in over the engine, listening to the ghost of power still sleeping inside. And in that silence, even the youngest mechanic felt it, a shift, small but undeniable, hope. The call went out just after dusk. A storm had rolled through Alabama that evening, thick clouds pressing low over the pine forests, lightning crawling like veins of fire across the horizon. Somewhere deep in the foothills beyond Fort Rucker, an old phone began to ring. In a small cabin surrounded by whispering trees, Raymond Cole sat alone at his workbench. The room smelled of oil, pine sap, and rain. Shelves lined with forgotten parts framed the walls, gyros, pressure gauges, even fragments of old Apache blades that he'd kept like relics of another life. The phone rang again. He didn't move at first. His eyes, pale and tired, stayed fixed on the open engine part before him, a disassembled carburetor from a Harley he'd been restoring for weeks. His hands, though scarred and calloused, still carried a quiet steadiness. By the third ring, he sighed. "If they're calling me," he muttered under his breath, "something's gone truly wrong." He picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was young, too young. It carried that formal tone of someone reading from a script. "Master Chief Cole, this is Captain Avery from Fort Rucker Base Command. We've been authorized to reach out regarding a technical issue involving an AH-64 Apache platform." Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. The rain outside hit harder against the tin roof. "You boys still flying those things?" "Yes, sir. One of our units has been grounded due to an unresolved engine malfunction. Colonel Harris specifically requested your consultation." There was a pause, long enough for the sound of thunder to fill the silence. Cole's expression softened. He hadn't heard that name in years. "Harris," he said quietly. "Didn't think he'd still be in uniform." "Yes, sir. He's base commander now." Cole leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. For a moment he didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the framed photograph hanging on the wall, a younger version of himself, standing beside an Apache under the desert sun. The men around him were long gone or long retired. The caption beneath read, "First live engine test, Fort Rucker, 1989. He exhaled slowly. "Tell him I'll be there in the morning." When dawn broke, the storm had passed. Mist drifted low over the hills as Cole loaded his pickup truck. The truck itself was a relic, a faded green Ford from the 1970s, patched and rebuilt more times than he could count. Its engine purred with the kind of warmth that came from being loved, not just maintained. He drove with the windows down, letting the humid air roll in. The road wound through pine forests and open fields, miles of quiet distance between the man and the world he'd left behind. As he drove, memories surfaced. Long nights under hangar lights, the sound of turbines whining to life, the smell of hot oil and jet fuel mingling with sweat. He remembered teaching recruits how to listen to a machine, not just read its data. "Engines talk," he used to say. "They'll tell you what's wrong if you learn their language." By late morning, the gates of Fort Rucker came into view. The guard at the checkpoint stared for a moment when Cole handed over his ID. The old laminated card yellowed with age. The photograph faded. "Welcome back, Chief," the guard said finally, a hint of awe in his voice. Cole nodded. "Didn't think I'd see this place again." Inside the base, everything looked cleaner, sharper, almost clinical. The hangars gleamed under fresh coats of paint, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic instead of oil. The newer personnel walked past in pressed uniforms, eyes fixed on tablets and checklists. To them, Cole looked like a ghost, a remnant of a world they'd only heard about. When he stepped into the main hangar, the noise died almost instantly. Conversations stopped. Tools paused mid-turn. The sound of his boots against the floor echoed like a memory of discipline. Colonel Harris turned from the observation platform, his face breaking into something between relief and disbelief. The years had carved deep lines around his eyes, but the posture was still military, upright, measured, steady. "Master Chief," he said, walking forward. "It's been a long time." Cole's reply was quiet, almost amused. "You always did wait till the last minute, Harris." A few of the younger technicians glanced at each other, uncertain whether to salute. The colonel gestured them to relax. "He's not here for ceremony," he said. "He's here to teach us something we've forgotten." Cole's eyes drifted toward the Apache. She sat under the highlights, her matte green armor dulled by days of disuse. The open engine bay looked like a wound. He walked closer, his hand brushing the edge of the airframe, as if greeting an old friend. "She's still beautiful," he murmured. "But she's tired. You've been fighting her instead of listening." Harris nodded. "We've tried everything. Systems checked clean. No mechanical faults, no data errors. She just won't ignite." Cole said nothing. He crouched down near the intake panel, running a hand along the inner lip, feeling the metal's faint vibration from the cooling fans. He closed his eyes for a second, listening. Then almost to himself he whispered, "No, she's not broken. She's choking." Harris frowned. "Choking?" Cole stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Let me get a look at her heart," he said simply. The crew parted instinctively as he approached the open engine bay. His movements were slow, deliberate, reverent. There was no rush in him, no frustration, just the calm of someone who understood that machines, like people, needed patience before they could speak. For the first time in weeks, there was silence in the hangar, not the silence of failure, but the silence of attention. Every pair of eyes followed the old man as he leaned in over the engine, listening to the ghost of power still sleeping inside, and in that silence, Even the youngest mechanic felt it, a shift, small but undeniable. Hope. For the first time in weeks, the hangar felt different. It wasn't the sound that changed, it was the silence between sounds. The young technicians watched as Master Chief Raymond Cole began his quiet ritual of examination. No clipboard, no digital interface, just a small flashlight, a stethoscope-shaped mechanic's probe, and the kind of patience that only comes from decades of listening to things most men overlook. He circled the Apache like a priest studying the altar of an old faith. His boots made slow, deliberate taps on the floor. He ran his fingers across the exhaust ports, felt the residue, rubbed it between thumb and forefinger. The smell told him more than a diagnostic report ever could. "Burns too clean," he muttered softly. "Means she's running lean, starving herself before she ever breathes." One of the younger engineers frowned, glancing at a nearby monitor. "Sir, all fuel mix ratios are nominal." Cole didn't look up. "According to your screen, maybe. But the engine doesn't care about your numbers. She cares about pressure, temperature, and time. 3 things that never lie." He leaned deeper into the open bay, his weathered hands tracing a line of tubing near the fuel control assembly. The metal was slightly discolored, barely noticeable to anyone else. But Cole saw it. He felt it. He turned slightly. "Who replaced this line?" A corporal stepped forward, nervous. "That was part of the second maintenance cycle, sir. Standard procedure. New titanium composite feed." Cole's eyes narrowed. "Composite? On a T-700? He tapped the line gently. "You can't cheat breath with new metal. These engines were designed for expansion, steel that flexes when it heats. This stuff stays rigid." "She's choking on her own heartbeat." The corporal blinked, unsure whether to defend himself or apologize. "Don't take it personal, son," Cole said, his tone softening. "You followed the book. But the book was written by people who stopped listening a long time ago." He stood up, stretching his back, and turned to Harris. "I'll need the old supply manifests, back when these birds first came off the line. And a torch. I'm not running software until I hear her breathe again." Harris nodded, motioning to a sergeant. "Get him what he needs." Over the next few hours, the hangar became a cathedral of concentration. Cole worked in near silence, occasionally murmuring to himself. Old habits, small cues only he understood. He disassembled the secondary fuel manifold with the precision of a surgeon, inspecting each coupling, each bolt. The younger engineers followed his movements like students watching a master painter at work. There was something mesmerizing about the way he treated the machine, not as a problem to be solved, but as a conversation to be understood. When he paused, it wasn't from exhaustion. It was listening. Every few minutes, he'd close his eyes and let his fingers rest on the engine casing, feeling the vibrations from the auxiliary power unit. He could tell when the airflow was uneven, when the lines trembled slightly off rhythm. "See this?" he said quietly to the nearest technician, pointing to a faint ring of soot around the pressure valve. "That's not residue. That's memory. That mark tells me she's been overcorrecting, compensating for bad feed timing. Somewhere in your system, pressure's building too late. She's trying to protect herself." The young man nodded, trying to keep up. Cole smiled faintly. "Engines have instincts. They'll try to live even when you build them wrong." Hours passed. The desert light shifted from gold to amber through the hangar windows. The heat softened, and the smell of metal deepened into something almost organic. Sweat dripped from every brow, but no one complained. Then, as the last sunlight faded, Cole straightened, his eyes fixed on a single connection point beneath the right turbine mount, a narrow, almost invisible fitting, where 2 lines met. He crouched again, running the edge of his thumbnail along the seam. "There it is," he whispered. He pointed. "This line, whoever installed it used a quick-seal coupling. Modern type. Works fine for hydraulics, not for combustion flow. The old seals expanded under heat. This one doesn't. When she fires, pressure drops just long enough to starve the ignition." The head engineer stepped closer, incredulous. That's less than a millisecond delay." Cole nodded. "And that's all it takes. A heartbeat too late, and you lose the pulse." He stood, wiping his hands with a rag that looked older than some of the men watching him. "Get me an old compression seal. Steel. The kind we used before the upgrades. You still got one?" The room fell silent. Then from the back, an older quartermaster raised a hand. "I might," he said. "There's a crate in storage marked Legacy Components. Been collecting dust since 2003. Cole gave a rare smile, then dusted off. "Let's bring her back the way she remembers." As the sun set, the hangar lights flickered to life, casting long shadows across the floor. The Apache stood at the center, patient and wounded. While men who doubted began to believe again, Cole placed his palm flat against the engine casing. The gesture almost like a blessing. "She's not fighting you," he said quietly. "She's waiting for you to remember who she is." Harris watched from a few steps away, arms folded, eyes reflecting the glow of the overhead lights. He realized something he hadn't felt in years, the sense that he was witnessing not just a repair, but a lesson about time, humility, and the strange language of machines that only a few men ever truly learned to hear. And for the first time, the colonel understood why the younger generation struggled. They knew technology, but this man knew truth. That night, after the hangar lights dimmed and the younger crew had gone to rest, Raymond Cole remained behind. He sat alone on a metal stool beside the Apache, the quiet hum of cooling engines filling the silence. A single work light hung above him, swaying gently in the draft, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the hangar floor. His hands rested on his knees, scarred, thick, the kind of hands that carried stories no one else remembered. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. 4 men stood beside a prototype Apache, grinning through the dust. One of them, younger, leaner, eyes sharp as steel, was him. The caption, faded to near illegibility, read, "First Power Systems Test, 1989. He stared at it for a long time. Then, as he lowered the photo, his mind slipped backward, not just in memory, but in sound and scent and color. The air changed. The walls dissolved into the bright white heat of the Arizona test range. Back then, the Apache wasn't legend yet. It was just a dream, a monstrous, unpredictable machine that refused to behave. The early turbines were unstable, overheating during prolonged flight, failing under stress tests. Every night, teams of engineers and mechanics stayed late, covered in soot and frustration. Cole was barely in his 30s then, but already a master of the impossible. He had no degree, no formal title, just instincts honed by years of listening to things that others only measured. He'd spent his youth fixing tractors, motorcycles, anything that had a pulse of metal. By the time he joined the Army's aviation program, he'd learned that machines spoke, not in words, but in rhythm, and that was how he first earned his reputation. One summer night in 1989, a prototype Apache engine exploded on the test stand. The team froze, flames leaping skyward, alarms blaring, metal twisting like paper. They were minutes from losing the entire assembly when Cole, calm amid the chaos, grabbed a wrench and shut off the secondary flow valve by hand. He burned his palm to the bone, but the explosion stopped. After that night, they called him the man who could hear danger before it spoke. He remembered long nights in that desert hangar, the constant buzz of generators, the sting of fuel fumes, the glow of molten metal from welding torches. He'd often stay after everyone else had gone, sitting beside the engines as they cooled, just listening. To most, it was noise. To him, it was conversation. He'd learned to tell the difference between fear and fatigue in a turbine's hum. A soft whine meant the compressor was anxious. A rough rattle meant it was angry. A sputtering cough meant it was scared. He treated every engine like a living thing, not perfect, but trying, and it was that empathy, that strange mechanical compassion that saved countless aircraft in the field years later. He remembered Afghanistan, 2003, the dust storms that rolled through like living walls, the sound of rotor blades cutting through choking air. One night an Apache had gone down after takeoff, engine failure, complete stall. Cole was already in the airfield workshop when the call came through. The pilots had survived. The crew was safe, but the bird was gone. That night, he'd walked the wreckage by flashlight, boots sinking into sand, the air still heavy with the scent of burned fuel. He found the broken turbine casing and crouched beside it. Everyone thought it was just bad luck, a manufacturing defect, they said. But Cole knew better. He picked up a fragment of the casing, rubbed his thumb along the edge, and listened to the echo of the break. "Overheated bearings," he'd whispered. She was screaming before she went silent. He'd sent his report up the chain, and within a month, that defect was corrected across every Apache in the field. He'd saved lives, not by theory, but by intuition. That's what made him different. While others trusted numbers, he trusted resonance, and yet time was cruel. As the years passed, new officers came in, younger, sharper, fluent in computers and protocols. They respected him, but they didn't understand him. They spoke a different language. He trained hundreds of them, men and women who'd go on to maintain some of the most advanced aircraft in history. But with every passing year, fewer of them asked why the old methods mattered. They wanted efficiency, not intimacy. When he retired, the world barely noticed. One handshake, one certificate, and a quiet drive home. No ceremony, no farewell flight. Just a man walking away from the only thing he ever truly understood. Back in the present, the hum of the hangar drew him out of the past. The night air was cooler now. He tucked the photo back into his pocket and exhaled slowly. He turned to look at the Apache once more, the same breed of machine that had shaped his entire life. He whispered softly, "You and me, old girl. We've been through worse." The overhead lights flickered faintly, the echo of power shifting through the circuit. Somewhere deep within the fuselage, a faint click answered him, metal expanding, contracting. Breathing, he smiled. "You still remember," he said. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of rain and jet fuel. The sound was faint but steady, like the heartbeat of something ancient stirring back to life. As dawn approached, Cole stayed awake beside her, not as a mechanic, but as an old friend keeping vigil. And in that stillness, with memories whispering like ghosts, he realized something profound. This wasn't just about fixing an engine, it was about reminding the young what it meant to care. The next morning broke in silence. The hangar stood beneath a bruised blue dawn, its steel ribs glowing faintly in the first touch of light. Inside, the Apache sat like a sleeping titan, motionless, patient, waiting. Rows of tools gleamed on the benches. The air smelled faintly of oil, ozone, and coffee gone cold. Raymond Cole was already there. He'd been up all night. He hadn't touched the manuals, hadn't logged a single data point. Instead, he'd listened, hour after hour, tracing the pulse of the machine with his fingertips, running them over bolts, valves, and seams as if reading Braille from a forgotten scripture. Now, as the others arrived, they found him standing beside the open cowling, sleeves rolled up, expression unreadable. The commander, Captain Dwyer, approached cautiously. "You've been here all night?" Cole didn't look up. "She's been talking." The younger engineers exchanged confused glances. One of them whispered under his breath, "Talking?" Cole ignored them. He pointed to a section near the power turbine housing, a maze of wires, sensors, and hydraulic lines. "Every man in this hangar has looked here," he said quietly, "but you've been looking with your eyes, not your ears." He reached for a wrench and loosened a bolt just enough to shift a narrow copper tube aside. Behind it, the faintest shimmer of fuel residue clung to a joint. Barely visible, the crew leaned closer. "There's your ghost," he said. "Hairline fracture in the secondary fuel manifold. Pressure leak so fine it vanishes under heat expansion. You'll never see it on diagnostics." He paused. "But you can hear it." To prove his point, he tapped the area gently with a small metal rod, once, twice, 3 times. Each time the hangar echoed differently. The young techs blinked. They hadn't noticed before, but now that he pointed it out, there it was, the faintest irregular hollow note hidden under the metallic rhythm. Cole smiled. "She's been whispering her pain for days. They move fast after that." Under Cole's direction, the team stripped the fuel line, replaced the faulty joint, and purged the system. Every motion was deliberate, not rushed, not careless. He guided them through the process with the calm precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, even when no one else believed it possible. When they sealed the final bolt, the commander gave him a nod. "Let's see if your ghost was real." Cole didn't answer. He simply walked to the side console and placed his hand on the ignition switch. His fingers trembled, not from doubt, but from the weight of it all. The entire hangar fell silent. He looked at the Apache one last time, as though seeing an old friend across a long distance. Then he turned the key. At first there was only a low hum. The turbines began to spool, drawing breath from the air like lungs reawakening. The digital meters flickered alive, green lights pulsing across the console. A soft vibration rolled through the floor, deep and steady. The whine rose, grew sharper, a metallic crescendo filling every inch of the hangar. Cole watched every gauge, every needle, every light. The others held their breath. At 60% power, the Apache's pitch shifted, that same stubborn growl they'd heard for days. But instead of sputtering out, it stabilized. The hum deepened into a perfect resonant tone. At percent. 80, 90, no alarms, no warnings. The sound was pure, balanced, alive. The commander exhaled, a disbelieving smile breaking across his face. "It's holding steady," Cole nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the machine. "She's just been waiting for someone to listen." The turbines roared now, echoing through the base. Dust lifted off the floor in rippling waves. The Apache's rotor blades turned slowly, catching the morning light. Each rotation like the heartbeat of something reborn. For a moment, everyone just stood there, staring, grinning, stunned. Then, without warning, the commander clapped his hands. "That's it. That's it, people. She's back!" Applause filled the hangar. Not loud but raw, the kind that came from relief and awe. The younger engineers surrounded Cole, shaking his hand, thanking him, asking how he knew. He only smiled faintly and said, "I didn't know. I remembered." Later that morning, as the Apache was prepped for flight testing, the crew gathered outside the hangar doors. The air was crisp now, the desert horizon glowing gold under the rising sun. The pilot, suited and ready, climbed into the cockpit. Cole stood beside the commander, eyes fixed on the machine as the rotors began to turn faster, slicing the air into thunder. The helicopter lifted from the tarmac in a burst of wind and power. Every head tilted upward. It hovered for a moment, the ground trembling beneath its shadow, then rose higher, steady, smooth. "Graceful," the commander glanced at Cole. "After all these years, still teaching us how to listen," Cole chuckled quietly. "Machines are honest, Captain. They don't lie. They just get lonely." The commander laughed softly, but his eyes glistened. He extended a hand. "You just saved us weeks, maybe months." Cole looked at the Apache soaring higher into the morning sky. The sound of its rotors echoed off the hangars, off the desert hills, off the distant silence of years gone by. He didn't take the credit. He didn't need to. For him, the sound alone, that perfect. Steady thrum of power and was enough. When the Apache disappeared over the horizon, Cole stood there a long time, squinting against the light. To everyone else, it was just a successful test flight. To him, it was something sacred, a conversation resumed between old friends. He turned away from the sunrise, dusted off his hands, and walked back toward the hangar. There was still work to do, and for the first time in years, the old veteran felt alive again. By afternoon, the desert air shimmered again, this time not with failure or frustration, but with a quiet, almost sacred calm. The Apache had returned from its test flight with flawless data. Every gauge reading was nominal, every vibration smooth. The machine had roared through the sky as though it had never faltered. The hangar that had once echoed with doubt now held something else. Silence, heavy with respect. Men who once second-guessed the old man now found themselves speaking in softer tones, as though afraid to disturb something fragile. The younger engineers, who once rolled their eyes at his methods, now looked toward him with quiet reverence. Cole, however, seemed unchanged. He sat alone at a metal table near the back of the hangar, sipping cold coffee from a paper cup. His hands, rough and oil-stained, rested on the table like worn instruments of a long-forgotten trade. Around him, the team continued their work, cleaning tools, logging reports, recalibrating systems. But every so often, someone's gaze would drift toward him. He didn't notice. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. He was watching the light move across the hangar floor, the slow crawl of the afternoon sun filtering through high glass windows, painting golden stripes over concrete. It reminded him of old airfields, long gone. The commander approached quietly. No ceremony, no clipboard, just a gentle nod of gratitude. "Raymond," he said. Cole looked up, blinking as if coming out of a long thought. "Sir." The commander placed a folder on the table, an official document, stamped and signed. "You just saved us a multi-million-dollar machine and months of downtime. I'd say that deserves more than a thank you." Cole studied the folder, but didn't reach for it. "You don't owe me anything, Captain." The commander pulled up a chair. "Maybe not. But you reminded this team what experience feels like." Cole's lips curved in a small, tired smile. "Experience is just the name we give our mistakes when we survive them." The commander laughed softly, shaking his head. "You know, some of those kids thought you were crazy." "They weren't wrong," Cole said. "You have to be a little crazy to love a machine that can bite back." They sat there for a while. Two men from different generations sharing the same silence. Outside, the Apache's rotor blades were still turning slowly, coasting to a stop. The pilot walked past, helmet under arm, and gave Cole a crisp salute. Cole returned it without words. There was no need. Later, as the crew prepared to shut down the hangar for the night, one of the younger engineers, a tall kid named Harris, approached. His voice carried the uncertainty of youth, the kind that struggles to bridge the distance between admiration and pride. "Mr. Cole," he asked, "can I ask you something?" Cole turned his head slightly, nodding. "How did you know where to look?" "The diagnostics didn't show a thing. The systems cleared every test. But you found it like you'd seen it before." Cole studied him for a moment before answering. "You don't look for the problem, son. You listen to what isn't there." Harris frowned slightly. "I don't understand." "That's all right," Cole said. "You will, after enough machines stop talking to you." He stood, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, firm, steady, warm. "Never trust the screen more than your senses. The numbers help you understand what's wrong. But sound, smell, touch, they tell you why." Harris nodded slowly, the lesson settling somewhere deep. "I remember that." Cole gave him a faint smile. "You'd better. Because one day, this place will call you the old man." The sun was setting when Cole finally stepped outside. The horizon glowed in layered shades of red and gold, the kind of sunset that looked older than time itself. He walked past the lineup of grounded aircraft, black silhouettes against the fading light. Each one whispered memories, fragments of stories that never made it into reports or debriefs. He stopped beside the Apache, the one that had broken, the one that had tested every ounce of patience and faith in that hangar. He reached out, resting his hand on the side of the fuselage. The metal was still warm from flight, smooth under his palm. "Still got some fight left in you," he murmured. For a long moment, he just stood there, the quiet hum of cooling metal filling the air, the wind tugging gently at his sleeves. Then he stepped back, turned toward the desert, and began walking toward the base perimeter, where the sky stretched wide and unending. Behind him, the hangar lights flickered on, pale gold squares glowing against the deepening blue. The sound of the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint echo of rotor blades, fading, yet eternal. When Cole reached the edge of the tarmac, he stopped and looked back one last time. The Apache gleamed under the floodlights like a guardian reborn. He could almost hear her heart beating again, the steady rhythm of power and trust, of craftsmanship and care. He smiled, not because he'd been proven right, but because something older than pride had been restored. It wasn't about fixing a machine. It never had been. It was about remembering how to listen, to metal, to wind, to silence, to the past. He turned his eyes back to the open desert. The night was coming, slow and gentle. Stars began to pierce the horizon one by one. He walked on, each step echoing softly, each breath steady and sure. Somewhere, an old rotor creaked in the distance, a final salute to the man who never stopped believing that the soul of a machine could speak if you just learned to hear it. The next morning dawned quiet and silver. A low mist hung over the base, softening the edges of steel and concrete. It was the kind of morning that made everything seem slower, more thoughtful, as if the world itself was pausing to breathe. The hangar was nearly empty now. The engineers had gone back to their routines, the pilots to their drills, and the reports were already being filed. Numbers, graphs, performance logs, proof that the Apache had passed every test. To most, the event would soon fade into another line on a maintenance record. Just another fix, another case closed, but not for the commander. He stood by the hangar door, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the tarmac. The faint outline of the Apache gleamed through the haze, its shape proud and still. In the distance, he saw a lone figure walking toward the gates, small against the morning expanse. The desert light turning his shadow long and thin. Cole, no ceremony, no farewell, no medals or speeches. Just a quiet departure, the same way he had arrived. The commander watched him go, a faint ache rising in his chest, the kind that comes from witnessing something rare, something pure, and knowing it will never quite return, the same way again. He turned to one of his junior officers nearby. "You see that man walking out there?" "Yes, sir." "Remember him," the commander said softly. "Because what he taught us isn't written in any manual." The young officer hesitated, unsure what to say. "What did he teach us, sir?" The commander looked back toward the distant figure. That not everything that breaks is broken. Miles away, Cole reached the edge of the base road where the desert began, endless, golden, alive with the hum of wind. His old pickup waited there, sun-faded paint and dust-coated mirrors. The kind of vehicle that carried more miles of memory than any odometer could count. He opened the door, paused, and looked back once more. The hangar was a silhouette now. Far behind him, a quiet fortress of steel and memory. He could almost hear the faint echo of the Apache's blades from the day before. The sound lingered in his chest like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. He smiled, small and content. For all the years that had passed, all the machines he'd known, all the battles fought and friends lost, it was still the same truth that carried him. Every machine has a soul. You just have to earn the right to hear it. He slid into the driver's seat and started the truck. The old engine coughed once, twice, then rumbled to life. Cole listened for a moment, a mechanic's instinct, a habit born of decades. The sound was rough, uneven, but honest. It made him chuckle. "Still talking to me, huh?" he murmured. Then he shifted into gear and pulled away, the truck rolling steady down the dusty road until the base disappeared behind him. Back inside the hangar, the commander found something on the workbench, a small, grease-stained notebook left behind. Inside were sketches of turbine layouts, handwritten notes, and faint pencil markings describing sound patterns, vibration frequencies, and small reminders in block letters. "Listen first. Touch before you test. Machines don't fail, they warn." On the last page, there was a single line, written with a shaky hand, but clear intent. "The loudest wisdom comes from the quietest things." The commander closed the notebook slowly, his throat tightening. He looked around the hangar, at the polished tools, the humming lights, the young faces moving with purpose, and he felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he realized this place wasn't just about engines and missions. It was about legacy, the kind of inheritance that couldn't be passed through medals or manuals, only through the way a man worked, listened, and cared. He tucked the notebook under his arm and whispered, "Thank you, Sergeant. That evening, as the sun sank beyond the horizon, the Apache was prepped again, not for repair, but for flight. The same young pilot climbed aboard. This time, before starting the engine, he paused and ran his hand along the fuselage. It was something he'd seen Cole do, a quiet gesture of respect, acknowledgement and connection. When he turned the ignition, the sound that followed was smooth, strong, alive. The rotors spun into motion, and the air filled with that deep, steady rhythm once more, a sound that carried across the desert, through the hangars, and into the memory of every man who had been there when the old veteran brought life back to a dying machine. The commander stood on the tarmac, watching the helicopter ascend into the gold-tinged sky, and as it climbed, leaving behind trails of dust and thunder, he felt something simple yet profound take root. The modern world had all the data it could want, but what it needed most was still the human ear. As the Apache disappeared into the distance, the last rays of sun flared against its blades, turning them into streaks of light. In that moment, it no longer looked like a machine at all. It looked like memory in motion, the embodiment of everything men like Cole had given to keep the sky alive. The commander stood there long after it vanished, the sound fading to a whisper, then to silence. He finally spoke, just loud enough for the wind to carry it away. "Respect the hands that built what you fly." The desert took his words, scattering them among the sands, to be carried like the echo of rotor blades. To those who still remembered how to listen, wisdom doesn't retire, it just waits to be called upon.